At the beginning of the 1930s, the Italian aviator Colonel Amedeo Micozzi developed the concept of an attack aircraft designed to strike enemy targets at a distance of up to 186 miles beyond the front line. Such an aircraft had to possess good speed and maneuverability in order, if necessary, to defend itself against enemy fighters. It was assumed that thanks to this, the attack aircraft could operate without fighter escort. The practical development of Micozzi's concept was carried out on Caproni and Breda aircraft, which appeared in 1933 to 34. Both types were quite modern-looking monoplanes. One of them even had retractable landing gear, but their speed was deemed insufficient for the future. Both types reached a maximum of about 217 miles per hour. Therefore, these aircraft were not built in large numbers, and the issue of a more advanced machine came to the forefront. The requirements called for the creation of a two-seat combat aircraft with fixed forward-firing armament and a defensive turret mount, capable of being used as a fast bomber and without an observer gunner, also as a single-seat fighter. The design team of Breda, headquartered near Milan, decided to follow an evolutionary path, making the necessary changes to the previous project. The development was again led by the same designers, Antonio Parano and Giuseppe Panzeri. First of all, it was necessary to increase the aircraft's power, in simple terms, to install a more powerful engine. The engine used on the previous model produced 650 horsepower, while the new aircraft required at least 200 horsepower more. Not finding a suitable engine among Italian companies, the Breda designers chose the French 14-cylinder air-cooled Gnome Rhone engine, rated at 880 horsepower. This power plant was installed on the prototype of the new aircraft, which received the designation BA-65. The prototype made its first flight in September 1935 under the control of Breda's chief test pilot Ambrogio Colombo, and already on October 27th, after a short program of factory trials, it was handed over to the military. The aircraft was flown from Milan to a Roman airfield, and even on this flight, it demonstrated remarkable performance, covering the distance at an average speed of 256 miles per hour. During military trials, given the good speed characteristics of the machine, the main task was to assess the new aircraft's potential as a fighter. A series of experimental dogfights was conducted against the Fiat biplane fighter, and the outcome was entirely predictable. Although the new aircraft significantly outpaced the Fiat in speed, in turning combat the biplane showed its superiority. As a result, it was concluded that the new Breda should be used as an interceptor of fast, non-maneuverable targets. Later, when the question arose about sending these aircraft to Spain, their role was defined as anti-bomber, that is, interceptors for Soviet bombers. The tests also revealed a negative trait of the Breda, its poor controllability. While this could be tolerated as long as the aircraft was flown by experienced test pilots, once it reached regular combat pilots, it led to several serious accidents and crashes. Each time, the investigation commissions pointed to the terrible controllability of the aircraft. The company even had to send its own test pilots to combat units so they could personally teach line pilots the proper and safe way to handle the new aircraft. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. The results of the military trials were recognized as generally acceptable, and Breda received an order for serial production. At the same time, it was requested that the turret of the prototype be replaced with a more advanced one, with wider firing angles, that the reliability of the landing gear retraction system be improved, and above all, that an even more powerful engine be installed. However, the first production series of the new aircraft were equipped with the same Gnome Rhone engines manufactured under license by an Italian company. By mid-1936, the attack aviation of the Italian Air Force had been organized into the 5th Aviation Brigade, which combined the 5th and 50th regiments. Altogether, they had 12 squadrons equipped with old types of aircraft, and their strength was far below the authorized numbers. In June 1936, one of these squadrons, the 160th, received the first new aircraft. This was the prototype, while the first production aircraft entered service with the 167th Squadron. The flight personnel of the assault units initially welcomed the new aircraft with enthusiasm, but after becoming better acquainted with the temperamental nature of the fast monoplane, their enthusiasm faded. Interestingly, Italian sources note another characteristic reason for the high accident rate of the new aircraft, in addition to its poor controllability. The personnel of the assault aviation units largely consisted of young, overconfident pilots who fancied themselves aces and were not inclined to listen carefully to the advice of instructors and senior colleagues. In short, only the very low production rate prevented even heavier losses of both equipment and pilots. By the end of 1937, that is, a year and a half after its adoption into service, assault aviation had only about 20 of the new aircraft, approximately the same number as the old models. And in the following year, 1938, the Air Force began to receive aircraft of a new modification with 18-cylinder Fiat engines rated at 1,000 horsepower. The machines with the older engines were transferred to the 2nd Fighter Regiment, whose pilots were far from enthusiastic about these aircraft, which had already gained an ill reputation. Deliveries of BA-65 aircraft with new A-80 engines proceeded fairly quickly. And by May 8, 1938, the 50th Aviation Regiment already had 18 such machines. These aircraft took part in demonstration flights at the Furbara airfield. During these exercises, held to coincide with Hitler's visit, Benito Mussolini and the King of Italy were also present alongside the distinguished foreign guest. 18 BA-65 attack aircraft together with 7 AR-1 planes demonstrated attacks on ground targets using small-caliber bombs and machine gun fire. At the same time, one of the BA-65s was used for the first test of the maximum bomb load specified in the documentation, 705 pounds, with the total payload of the aircraft reaching 2,500 pounds. The result proved unsatisfactory. The pilot in command, Lieutenant Colonel Savarino, declared that it was absolutely impossible to fly. As a result, the payload capacity was limited to 1,985 pounds, which of course did not improve the combat potential of the aircraft. In July 1938, the assault regiments previously stationed near Rome were redeployed to northern Italy, closer to the anticipated theater of operations. The air already smelled of war. The new base of the 5th Regiment became Linate Pozzolo Airfield, while the 50th was relocated to the new airbase at Treviso. However, the combat value of the BA-65 remained low and accident rates were high. After 8 pilots died in crashes within half a year, in October 1938, all flights with the BA-65 were banned. The ban was lifted only at the end of January 1939. As a result, by the end of 1938, the assault units were classified as having limited combat readiness. The inspection report noted that the average monthly flight time per pilot amounted to only 7.3 hours, sufficient only to maintain minimal flying skills. The unsatisfactory operational qualities of the BA-65 forced the military to suspend further acceptance of these aircraft, leaving 33 machines at the factory awaiting a decision on their further assignment, as stated in the official order. Thus, the career of the BA-65 slid into decline before it had even properly begun. In 1939, the assault aviation units began to receive the twin-engine BA-88 Linz. Although these later proved just as unsuccessful as their predecessors, they began to re-equip the 5th Aviation Regiment. Crews of the 5th flew the BA-65 for the last time during the Army summer maneuvers in the valley of the Po River. The 50th Regiment, after spending 9 months in Treviso, was transferred at the beginning of 1939 to Libya, to the Benghazi airfield. The redeployment disrupted the training process, which had only just started to stabilize. Moreover, in the North African conditions, the A-80 engines did not perform well. At low altitudes, dust quickly caused failures. Once again, flying accidents increased, and as a result, Marshal Balbo issued an order to withdraw the BA-65 from service. On the eve of the war, the 50th Aviation Regiment was practically without combat aircraft, receiving as a temporary replacement the light twin-engine monoplanes Caproni K310 Libeccio, training bombers scarcely suitable for combat operations. As we can see, the BA-65 turned out to be a remarkably unlucky aircraft. Nevertheless, it still had to take part in combat. And the first combat episode of its career, as with many other aircraft created in the 1930s, was the war in Spain. Apart from combat units, several BA-65s were briefly used at the flight school in Foggia. Here, these aircraft, together with several BA-64s and AR-1s, were employed for training assault aviation pilots. But when in November 1939 the flight school was transferred to Rimini, its BA-65s remained at Foggia awaiting write-off. The total number of BA-65 aircraft delivered to the Italian Air Force amounted to 218 units, including 81 planes with K-14 engines and 137 with A-80 engines. Of the latter, 80 were supplied by Breda, while another 57 were license-built by Caproni Visola. The final machines were completed in July 1939. Among the 700 Italian aircraft sent to Spain during the Civil War were BA-65s with K-14 engines. The first of this type arrived in Seville in April 1937, but their combat use was delayed due to necessary modifications of this still raw design. As a result, the combat debut of the Bredas took place only in August. 13 BA-65s were grouped into a squadron, which received the designation 65 and was sent to the front near the city of Santander. At first, the 65th Squadron under Captain Desiderio was based at the Soria airfield. Here, the BA-65s were tested as interceptors, although they lacked the necessary climb rate. To compensate, air patrols were organized, but this exhausted the crews, forced to perform long flights at high altitudes in unheated cabins and without oxygen masks. The BA-65's achievements as a fighter were meager. Only Sergeant Dell'Acqua managed to shoot down a single SB bomber near his home airfield. Later, the 65th Squadron was relocated to Tudela. Operating from this base, the BA-65s as assault aircraft took part in the Battle of Teruel. Under the command of their new leader, the daredevil Captain Finale, the attack crews acted with great aggression and audacity, striking precise blows at targets close to the front line. In the overwhelming majority of sorties, the BA-65s flew only with the pilot, taking a gunner observer on board only for a few reconnaissance missions. Almost immediately, they abandoned the standard placement of heavy bombs in the internal bay, since this made dive bombing impossible. Moreover, in the early BA-65s, the bomb bay could not accommodate bombs larger than 110-pound caliber. In the standard configuration, the aircraft carried a pair of 220-pound bombs on underwing racks, dropping them from dives at angles of 30-35 degrees. Another common bomb load option consisted of fragmentation bombs weighing 4.4 pounds. The aircraft could carry up to 168 such munitions in 4 containers installed in the bomb bay. In this case, the pilot released them when pulling out of a dive during the climb. On the second run, the pilot attacked the target with fire from 4 wing-mounted machine guns. In July 1938, the Republican Army launched an offensive on the Ebro River. In this battle, which lasted 115 days, the 65th Squadron operated from the Puy Moreno airfield under the command of Captain Miato. The Battle of the Ebro became a turning point in the Spanish War. The Republicans lost about 80,000 men and most of their aviation, but failed to achieve decisive success. In this battle, attack aircraft were successfully used against pontoon bridges. Conventional bombers operating from medium altitudes failed to score a single hit, while attack aircraft in low-level flight managed to destroy 3 bridges at the cost of 3 damaged aircraft. In December 1938, January 1939, attack aircraft fought in the Barcelona area, participating in the operation to capture the city, which culminated in success on January 26. In the final months of the war, the 65th Squadron successively changed bases in Logroño, Olmedo, Madrid, and finally in Sanjurgo, from where the attack aircraft carried out their last combat missions. In total, 23 attack aircraft were delivered to Spain, 17 of them with engines of one type and 6 with others. By the end of hostilities, 11 aircraft remained in service, which were handed over to the Francoist Air Force. Of the dozen lost aircraft, only 3 fell to combat losses, while the rest crashed in accidents and disasters. In Spain, the crews of attack aircraft, like their colleagues who remained at home, fully experienced the capricious nature of these planes. One of the fallen pilots of the 65th Squadron was Sergeant Chiopini, whose aircraft was shot down by anti-aircraft fire on March 30, 1938. He was posthumously awarded the Gold Medal for military valor. Pilots returning from Spain brought valuable experience to the assault regiments, helping improve their combat readiness. By the time Italy entered the Second World War on June 10, 1940, not a single such aircraft remained in service with the assault units of the Italian Air Force. All had been stored awaiting write-off, partly in Libya, planes that had previously flown with the 5th Regiment. Partly in Italy, only the 2nd Fighter Regiment continued to operate a few attack aircraft, the oldest ones with outdated engines. But the war gave this aircraft a new chance. According to pre-war plans, the 50th Assault Regiment, based in Sorman near Tripoli, was to resist a possible attack from Tunisia. But the threat from British tank units on the eastern border of Libya proved more pressing, so the regiment was ordered to redeploy to an airfield near Tobruk. However, the 4-squadron regiment was able to field only one squadron, the 159th, which had 7 light bombers. The rest of the crews were left without aircraft. Their old attack planes had been taken away and new ones had not yet arrived. In this situation, the commander of the Libyan Air Force, General Porro, ordered Captains Del Oro and Finali, both veterans of the Spanish War, to immediately restore to flying condition all old attack aircraft that could be repaired and transfer them to the airfield. While the repairs were underway, the 159th Squadron desperately tried to halt the British forces, losing all of its light bombers in 2 sorties on June 13th. The unit was replenished with 24 aircraft that had been ordered by Hungary and confiscated at the start of the war, but these were not enough for long. Finally, on June 21st, the first repaired attack aircraft arrived, along with several fighters equipped with bomb racks. Now the 12th Air Group operated from the airfield, consisting of 2 squadrons, with the 159th armed with attack aircraft and the 160th with fighters. By the end of the month, the 12th Group had only 10 combat-ready aircraft, 5 attack planes and 5 fighters. But deliveries of repaired aircraft continued, and by July 20th the group had 7 attack aircraft and 10 fighters. By that time, the 2nd Group of the 50th Regiment, the 16th, also of mixed composition, had arrived at the airfield. Its 167th Squadron had 10 fighters, and its 168th had 5 attack aircraft. These were planes with old engines transferred from the 2nd Regiment. Thus, the entire 50th Assault Regiment was concentrated on a single airbase. Among the most significant operations of the second half of the summer were the regiment-wide raids on July 25th and 27 against British columns near Sidi Rezeg, which inflicted heavy losses on the enemy. On August 4th, 6 attack aircraft from the 159th Squadron destroyed a British forward supply base. When British fighters attempted to intercept the strike aircraft, 3 were shot down by the escorting planes. In September 1940, Italian forces under General Graziani began their offensive on Sidi Baranis. The attack aircraft of the 50th Regiment actively supported the ground forces, losing 4 planes. By the end of the short offensive, the regiment had 28 combat-ready aircraft, 10 attack planes, and 18 fighters. On October 8th, the 50th Regiment suffered a heavy loss. During a raid on a British tank column south of Baranas, Captain Del Oro, one of the most experienced assault aviation pilots, was shot down and killed. He was posthumously awarded the Gold Medal for military valor. In mid-October, the 16th Group was redeployed to Bir el Quask. On October 18th, its aircraft, 6 attack planes, and 7 fighters carried out a long-range raid against the British airbase in the Siwa Oasis. On November 7th, the raid was repeated, this time involving 6 attack aircraft from the 159th Squadron with the support of 18 fighters. The heavy fighting in November left the 12th Group without a single combat-ready aircraft, and this unit was withdrawn for rest. Meanwhile, the 16th Group took part in desperate attempts to stop the British offensive that began on December 9th with the forces of the 7th Armored Division. In the fierce battles, it lost its last Breda attack aircraft, and after transferring a few surviving Fiat fighters to the returning group, it departed for Italy on January 2, 1941, to be re-equipped with Machi fighter bombers. Along with the 16th Group, the headquarters of the 50th Regiment also left. The 12th Group now became independent. At the beginning of January, it had 10 aircraft left in service, 6 Fiat fighters and 4 Breda attack aircraft, of which only 4 machines were combat-ready. Naturally, that could not last long. The last combat sortie, involving 4 Fiats and the only remaining Breda, took place on January 28th. The aircraft attacked enemy units east of Umas Salinas. By January 30th, the 12th Group had no operational aircraft left. In early February, it was withdrawn to Italy and re-equipped with Fiat fighter bombers. Over 8 months of fighting in North Africa, the 12th Group lost 6 Breda attack aircraft and 6 fighters in combat, while another 7 Bredas and 6 Fiats were written off for other reasons. The contribution of the attack aircraft was recognized by awarding the 50th Regiment the Silver Medal. In the 1930s, Italian-manufactured aircraft enjoyed considerable popularity on the international market and were in service with the air forces of many countries. These successes were explained by numerous records achieved by Italian aviation, accompanied by a powerful advertising campaign, as well as a carefully planned export policy. For example, when Iraq, traditionally under British control, sought to free itself from the strict guardianship of the United Kingdom, Italy was among the first to extend a helping hand. At the beginning of 1937, the Chief of Staff of the Iraqi Air Force, Colonel Javad, visited Italy. As a result of negotiations conducted through the Aviation Export Committee, a contract was signed for the delivery of 6 twin-engine bombers and about 15 Breda attack aircraft. According to the terms of the contract, 2 Bredas were fitted with dual controls. The deal also included the sale of 10 spare engines. The aircraft were delivered by sea to Basra, assembled by a team of Breda specialists, test-flown, and by November 1937 handed over to the customer. Thus, the Iraqi Air Force received Breda attack aircraft even earlier than the Italian Royal Air Force. The aircraft were assigned to the 5th Squadron. The Iraqi pilots had a fairly high level of training, noted even by the Italian instructor Lieutenant Guzza. Therefore, they managed to master this demanding aircraft without major difficulties, though not without tragedy. One pilot made a mistake, went into a spin, and was killed. In the spring of 1941, the personnel of the 5th Squadron took part in the Rashid Ali uprising. The attack aircraft carried out several sorties against British forces, suffering heavy losses. Only 2 Breda attack aircraft remained in the 5th Squadron. No records of their further fate have been found. The next buyer of Breda attack aircraft was Chile. In the summer of 1937, this Latin American country ordered 9 Nardi trainers and 20 Breda attack aircraft from Italy, 17 in the single-seat fighter version and 3 two-seat combat trainers. The Chilean modification was equipped with Piaggio engines. This 14-cylinder engine produced 1,340 horsepower, the same as the previous engine but weighed 220 pounds less. Specialists of the Italian Royal Air Force tested the Breda with the Piaggio engine, after which a proposal was made to replace the engines of the early production aircraft with this type. However, since the achieved performance improvement did not justify the high cost of the program, the replacement was abandoned. Thus, the new engines were installed only on export aircraft. Another difference from the Italian original was the replacement of the 2 Breda 12.7mm machine guns with Madsen machine guns of the same caliber. The batch of Breda attack aircraft ordered by Chile arrived by sea on December 14, 1938. As with the Iraqi order, some time was needed for assembly and flight testing, so the 4th Air Group, designated to receive them, began operating the Bredas only in March 1939. The career of the Italians in the Chilean Air Force turned out to be short. Their introduction was accompanied by a series of accidents and 2 crashes, which provoked a wave of criticism in the press. And although most incidents were caused by the pilots' poor training, the Air Force Command, eager to deflect accusations of poor flight training organization, shifted the blame to the manufacturer, claiming it had sold substandard aircraft. There was even talk of returning the Breda attack aircraft to Italy in exchange for a batch of Fiat fighters, which were successfully used by several Latin American countries and had proven themselves in the Spanish Civil War. But that never happened. In the end, the Bredas flew with the 4th Air Group until the end of 1941, and until 1946 they remained officially on its roster, though no longer airborne. The group actually operated light attack aircraft of American manufacture, North American. The 3rd foreign buyer of Breda attack aircraft, the Portuguese Air Force, took a more thoughtful approach. Having ordered 10 aircraft in 1937, the Portuguese Air Force Command decided not to struggle with introducing them at home, but instead sent a group of pilots to Italy. At the base of the 5th Air Regiment of the Italian Royal Air Force, the Portuguese pilots mastered not only the piloting of the Breda attack aircraft, but also underwent a course in combat employment. In Portugal, these Italian Breda bombers were received by the Day Bomber Squadron at the Sintra Air Base. However, even here they did not serve for long. The reason was nature itself. A powerful hurricane that struck the Sintra base on February 15, 1941, destroyed the hangar roof, which collapsed on the entire group of aircraft. As a result, none of these bombers could be restored. China also had a chance to receive these aircraft into service, and the Chinese military showed interest in them even earlier than representatives of other countries. As early as 1935, an agreement was signed to establish a joint company for the production of Italian-designed aircraft at a factory in the city of Nanchang. The first chosen project was the assembly of 30 of these bombers. At the insistence of the Chinese side, they planned to install American twin Wasp engines on them. But the start of work was constantly delayed since the Italian side insisted on retaining engines of its own production, first of one type, then of another. In the end, the assembly of the aircraft never began before October 20th, 1937, when Japanese bombers raided the Nanchang factory. And although the Enterprise suffered only minimal damage, the Italian government hastily recalled all its specialists back home. Thus, a final point was placed in the drawn-out story of the Chinese Breda aircraft. The Italian Breda aircraft was a single-engine, all-metal monoplane with retractable landing gear, a single- or two-seat multi-purpose combat aircraft. The wing consisted of a center section built together with the fuselage and removable trapezoidal consoles. The wing frame was a truss structure with two main spars connected by struts made of steel tubes. The wing skin was duralumin, except for the fabric covering behind the second spar. The mechanization included flaps and Handley Page-type leading-edge slats. The fuselage also had a truss structure with a tubular power frame, sheathed with duralumin sheets. The tubular engine mount was attached to the fuselage at 4 points. The pilot's cockpit was located above the wing's leading edge and provided good visibility. The gunner observer's cockpit on the two-seat versions was located behind the wing. Communication between the crew members was provided by a speaking tube. The onboard equipment included an electrical system powered by an engine-driven generator, an oxygen system, and a fire extinguisher. Space was reserved on the aircraft for the installation of a radio station and an aerial camera, but this equipment was far from always installed. The tail unit consisted of a fin and a stabilizer braced with struts. The covering was mostly fabric. The aircraft were fitted with 3 types of 2-row radial air-cooled engines. A 14-cylinder Italian engine rated at 880 horsepower on the early series for the Italian Air Force, an 18-cylinder Italian engine rated at 1,000 horsepower on most Italian aircraft, as well as export machines for Iraq and Portugal, and a 14-cylinder Italian engine rated at 1,000 horsepower on Chilean aircraft. In all cases, the engine was covered by a streamlined cowling with scrapes above the cylinder heads, the configuration of which differed depending on the engine type. The propeller was a 3-bladed metal variable pitch unit, 8.9 feet in diameter on aircraft with the first type of engines and 10.2 feet on others. The fuel system consisted of 2 main fuel tanks with a total capacity of 172 gallons installed in the fuselage behind the pilot's cockpit. If necessary, an additional 98-gallon tank could be installed in the bomb bay. All 3 tanks were protected against punctures. The oil tank capacity was 20 gallons. The armament consisted of 4 Breda wing-mounted machine guns, 2 heavy 12.7mm, 350 rounds per barrel, and 2 standard 7.7mm, 500 rounds per barrel. The 2-seat machines had a defensive 7.7mm machine gun in the navigator's cockpit, mounted on a compact retractable turret or a shielded Breda-type turret. The bomb armament was housed in a fuselage compartment designed for the vertical suspension of 4 bombs, weighing 110 pounds or 220 pounds each. Instead of large bombs, 4 containers could be installed, holding a total of 168 4-pound fragmentation bombs.